Teach me about the Great Lakes. Teach me about the Great Lakes. Welcome back to Teach Me About Great Lakes, a twice monthly podcast in which I, a Great Lakes novice, get people who are smarter and harder working than I am to teach me all about the Great Lakes. My name is Stuart Carlton, and I work with Illinois Indiana Sea Grant, and I'm joined this week by my good friend Carolyn Foley. Hello, Carolyn. How are you?
Hello, Stuart. I am doing pretty okay, thank you. How are you doing today?
I'm also pretty okay. Pretty okay to mostly okay to maybe somewhat okay. Yeah.
Yeah, one of our coworkers and I had a conversation earlier today about how if you ask a certain group of people, if you say, how's it going? And they respond with, well, I'm here. That actually means like much, much worse than what it's. So I'm not here. I'm maybe 3 steps above that.
You're 3 steps above here. That's good. Presence is important. It is. But no, I used to always be honest when people ask me that, because let's be, things are usually not that great. It's all in a downward spiral towards the end here. And so then I used to be, for always, what's up? Not much. But then I was honest for a long time. And then I learned you really can't be honest to that question. So you have to be 3 steps above honest, I guess, in your case.
Exactly. Yes.
Anyway,
who are we speaking with today?
We're going to speak today with Maria Dietrich, who's a professor at the University of Toronto. She and a whole bunch of co-authors wrote a paper on large lake, not Great Lakes, although there are Great Lakes in there, large lake degradation, kind of globally, and they looked at some of what's going on and set up a framework for thinking and worrying about that. And so since one of the main things we love to do is stress about environmental problems on this podcast, we're going to go ahead and do that. So the good news is she is a researcher. So let's go ahead and hit the researcher feature theme, and then we'll talk with Maria. Researcher feature. A feature in which a researcher gonna teach us about the Great Lakes. Our guest today is Dr. Maria Dietrich. She's an associate professor of biogeochemistry in the Department of Physical and Environmental Sciences and the Department of Earth Sciences at the University of Toronto. Maria, how are you today?
Great, thank you.
Thank you so much for coming on. We appreciate you joining us to talk about this interesting work that you do. So first of all, let's start with a real big picture. What is a biochemist exactly? What is it that you do?
It's actually biogeochemistry, and you can imagine that I'm interested in any interaction and understanding interaction between life and our Earth. So, for example, if we're looking into the lake, we want to understand cycling of any element, for example, nutrients. And if we take phosphorus, this cycle can be driven by many chemical reactions. But for many cases, the reaction will be triggered by organisms, even by microorganisms. So one very, very simple example, we're looking at the processes at the bottom of the lake.
Right.
Of course, it's a lot of mud and it's nice to play with, but you can imagine a lot of microorganisms working there and doing their job to release phosphorus or nutrients. So to work on this, we are talking about the subject of biogeochemistry. We need biology. We're also interested in the geological background, but we also need chemistry because it's a lot of chemistry going on. So I'm biogeochemist.
So that must give you
I love it.
Yeah, that must give you like a really interesting perspective on, what exactly it is that drives all of the stuff happening in the Great Lakes. That is interesting. And so one of the reasons we invited you on today is that you recently, with a whole bunch of colleagues, published a paper called, I'm going to get the title right, Scientists' Warning to Humanity, Rapid Degradation of the World's Large Lakes. And so I saw this paper and I was a little bit concerned, I'll be honest, because I don't like it when scientists are warning me. But let's sort of think about that. What is a large lake sort of in the way that you're talking about it, and why are they important?
I actually like your reaction. You should be actually concerned. And this paper is that is the main task of this paper. We want to warn humanity about large lakes. What is a large lakes? That was our first point of discussion. The first definition was actually in 1982, and the large lakes were defined by any inland waters greater than 500 square kilometers. In our paper, we selected and consider all the lakes which are larger than 100 kilometers square.
Okay. So smaller large lakes than the original definition.
Yes.
Yes. Was that just you had to pick a point, or what? How did you arrive at 100 square kilometers, right, in surface area?
Yes, because we were looking into the main impact of this lake and also the geographical distribution. If we look on all the lakes we selected, they actually account for almost 90% of the total surface area and volume of the world's lakes. So
Really?
you can imagine they are really crucial. They are really important. You can just look in our Great Lakes we're sitting up, and if look how many people actually live there. It's almost 50 million. And it's just like one system of the large lake. If we look in Japan and Lake Beaver, for example, provides drinking water for almost 15 million people. So those were like criteria why we actually limited our paper for the lakes larger than 100.
Although if you're getting 90% of the surface area or volume, it's not that limited, is it?
No, not at all. Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah. And so, so these are important because they contain a lot of water, about 90% or so. And now because
sorry, if I can, this is Carolyn. If I could just step in for a second, are they all freshwater lakes or are some of them saltwater lakes?
They're all different lakes. And of course, some of them are salt lakes. We also consider the diversity of the large lakes. Some of them salt lakes. And as you know, maybe the biggest in inner water is Caspian Sea, which is salt. But what is also important for us to cover the diversity in the world and to cover this geographical diversity, this different salinity, the different biota, and still being large. Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah.
Right. Cool. Thanks.
So obviously when you're looking at all these different lakes, it's hard to give a pat answer to this, but so this is about the degradation of the large lakes. Like what is causing degradation to these lakes? Like, is it, I mean, I assume it's primarily humans, but what are the types of degradations that you're seeing or that you're concerned about, I guess?
The degradation is actually, this is a very good question. The degradation can happen on different way. It could be physical, it could be chemical, it could be biological degradation. And
so you're perfect as a biogeochemist.
Yeah. Exactly. Right. That's why we're doing that. And if we look into the degradation and we're asking the question why large lakes are actually very sensitive, you can imagine those lakes have a huge surface area. And of course, if your lake has a huge surface area, it would be very sensitive to climate. It's evaporation, it's water temperature, its impact of precipitation, just talking about meteorological and climate condition. Mm-hmm. But we talk about huge population and ecological services as a habitat for us or for people. So we have a huge population. So the other source of degradation is anthropogenic impact. Mm-hmm. Of course, we're changing land use. Of course, we're using the water for our purposes. And this is all impacting these huge lakes. And this results in degradation, yeah.
So that's something I didn't expect. But the actual surface area makes the lake more vulnerable to climate stressors in some ways. Is that because it interacts with the air more, I suppose, is what it is?
Of course, just imagine. It has been shown. Even it's like there is some discussion about that larger lake, like Lake Superior, Lake Michigan, they're actually changing their temperature rapidly than a small lake, like Lake Erie. And if you imagine Lake Superior, which has been under ice cover for longer period of time, as it is now, it will impact the whole food chain. The lake is not as long under the ice cover.
Okay.
It means it will be easily warming up in the spring. It will be earlier. It's dangerous for cold species.
Yeah.
Very treacherous cold species like fish cold species. Maybe they cannot survive. It will be also impacting algae and so on, because it's a huge surface area and it's impacting. If you look on the other side to Lake Erie, the water temperature has not been changed as fast as in the Lake Superior and Lake Michigan.
And that's at least partially because of the surface area difference.
Exactly.
That's totally counterintuitive. Because you think it has, the larger volume of water would provide like ballast, but I guess not. So we're looking at, the degradations, of course, it's anthropogenic, it's climate, which is anthropogenic, of course. And it's changing in inputs. And so that leads me to this idea that your paper is called a warning, though. So can you explain to us why you decided, we're going to have a warning to humanity? And it looked like you said this is the second warning and there's a framework. Can you talk a little bit about the warning and the framework and how we can think about the lakes, I guess, as a result of that?
There's actually a long history of scientists warning. I think it started even in 90s. The scientists started warning to humanity in different aspects, which is kind of trying to find a dialogue between our society and scientists. And our paper...
They forgot to warn me. Whoops. I'll have to look into it.
And our paper is the main target was to provide a framework that we can actually access all the dangers of their degrading of the large lakes. What we actually thinking the large lakes are actually healthy, looks beautiful, and it's not as bad as small. That why this paper actually, that's how this paper has been written. It's a product of North American and European collaboration on one small workshop where we're starting saying, my God, we see a lot of changes. And what is great in the Great Lakes, there is a long history of monitoring, very long history of monitoring. So our research based on solid data, so we can actually provide a long history, and we can see, indeed, there is a huge degradation. We can look into the long sediment cores, the archives of history, the archives of history of land use changes, of environmental pollution, and we can actually combine this with the water quality data.
And so what types of organizations are gathering those long-term data sets that you're referring to? Are there particular organizations that you rely on?
There are several organizations, and there is in the paper, so we can't count them all. The Great Lake observatories, for example, for North American lakes, there is Environment Canada, their organization in the States. It's NOAA, so it's very, very, very long list of different organizations. There are a lot of organization in Europe. So you saw data on European lakes. The data goes back to 1920s and even 1800 something in Switzerland.
Wow.
There are many, thanks God, and many organizations which can governmental and governmental organization mainly who can provide the data.
So it is typically, even in other parts of the world, it's typically a government organization that maintains this long-term monitoring.
Yeah.
That is really important. Cool. So I had one other question about in terms of the degradation that you've been talking about through the paper. Are there a couple that were sort of consistent across the entire world rather than localized? Like, what are the threats that are kind of consistent everywhere? Or are there none that are consistent everywhere?
This is a very good question. So we will look into the different, and that was one of the main points why we were looking in North America and European lakes. And for example, the climate and impact of climate, the cause of degradation of the lake, it goes through all the different lakes. Eutrophication based on increase of nutrients impact and land use. Of course, those are degradation which can be observed in lakes in North America and in Europe. Nowadays, we have microplastics, which is a hot topic, and it goes to Arctic. So we can even find it in the Arctic. And just a very recent paper came from University of Toronto, where they were investigating microplastic from washing blue jeans, and they found that even in sediments in Arctic. So, like, you can imagine it, and that is exactly. So, what we can do, even once we're washing here our blue jeans, and this is very typical micro phaser, so micro phaser where you can find them back in Arctic. So. It's going through. Of course, there is some typical degradation if you have a mining site close to the large lake, or if you have different organic contaminants or heavy metals. Yeah, that's what we also have in here, for example, in Detroit or Hamilton Harbor. So we have a huge pollution from steel industry. It's very typical. Yeah. So it's just because we have steel industry here in Hamilton Harbor, and we see that in the sediment, a lot of iron. That can be typical and can be globally.
I encourage listeners who are interested in more microplastics. This has actually come up a couple times before. So why don't you go to teachmeabouttthegreatlakes.com/1, the number 1, to hear our very first episode where we talk with Sarah Zach about microplastics. Or if you want to go to teachmeabouttthegreatlakes.com/15, number 15, we speak with Dr. Lorena Rios Mendoza about the chemistry of microplastics. Lots of garbage. So that is an issue that's come up over and over and over again. And I guess I'm not surprised, but I am dismayed to hear you mention it here.
But I think it does a really good job of illustrating how, everything we're doing can affect what's happening all over the place.
Exactly. We're all connected.
Yeah, but it's such a challenge, though, because it's easy to be like, oh, yeah, we have blah, blah, blah. But I mean, you're talking about industry and jobs, and I'm wearing jeans as we speak. I'm glad to say I wore pants to work this week. But, and I will wash these sometime in the next several months. And so it's hard, isn't it?
Yeah, that's you don't know where you can go. It's everywhere. Yeah.
Well, you make some recommendations in the paper, though, about things that people can try to do to help with the degradation. Do you mind talking a little bit about some of those? And I know you mentioned that this list isn't exhaustive, but the fact that you pulled them together. Oh, also, incidentally, this paper is open access, so we'll leave a link for this one in the show notes for this note as well.
Wonderful.
So that people can have a look.
And we're not supposed to advocate, so I'm not going to advocate, but open access publishing is awesome. Love it.
Yeah. But back to the question. What are some of the recommendations that you make for people who want to help with some of the degradation that you talk about?
Of course, there is, as we all know in life, there is some small steps, some middle and some large steps, what we can do. And if we will start with the small steps, and we were just talking about the microplastic, and I would say the small step, of course, is to use as less as possible plastic. And going further, I would say to use as less as possible, producing waste. And of course, this is kind of more on passive side. On the active side, there is a lot of stewardship, especially in Great Lakes area. What I know, we have a lot of community beach cleaning or stewardship to collect the water samples. In Lake Ontario, I'm participating in collecting water samples during the massive rain, because during the rain, we know a lot of erosion happening, a lot of pollutants coming in, and sometimes monitoring is not working during the precipitation event. So just participate there. Of course, active participation in the decision making and policy making. And the big step is mitigation of climate change and looking how we're dealing with energy consumption. What is our carbon footprint? Are we traveling a lot? We're using CO2, and so on. I think it's a lot what we can do on all the spectra of as a consumers. Yeah, so it's a lot of stuff we can impact and can improve the water quality.
Right. And I just want to double back on a point you just made about how sometimes, because you have these great long-term data sets, but they are also well organized, well ahead of time, that sampling in place X will happen at time Y because we have to go to all of these other places. So having those opportunities, if you have a group that can go out like right after a big rain event, or we've talked about that in Lake Michigan too, that there are these huge plumes that come out. Like, how can we mobilize? Like, can we use drones or things like that to have a look at what's happening? So if community-based organizations can...
Yeah, that was a huge effort after Hurricane Harvey. I lived in the Galveston Bay area for that. And, one of the big things we did with the Galveston Bay Estuary Program was organized sampling for just those reasons, to see how stuff changed there.
Yes.
And then I'd be remiss if I didn't plug also the Cooperative Science and Monitoring Initiative, which is something that Sea Grant and who else? The EPA and Environment Canada. Yes, are all involved in this.
It's Great Lake protection action, remediation plans, and it's a lot of actually grants for so-called area of concerns on both sides for US and also for Canada. Yeah.
And do they have similar setups in other parts of the world too on large lakes? Do they have kind of these?
Yes, they have pretty similar. In many cases, large lakes are also like border.
Oh, right.
For example, Lake Geneva is border Switzerland and France. Lake Constance, where we have a lot of example in the paper, is a border lake between Germany and Switzerland. Lago Maggiore between Switzerland and Italy. In many cases, the bilateral agreement, not in many, in all cases, the bilateral agreement on the water quality, on monitoring, and there are special funds, I know from Germany, Switzerland, and Italy, there is even special funds for boarding water in the European Framework Program. Yes.
So I wanted to ask one more question about kind of how this paper developed. So if you look at it, we mentioned at the beginning that there are a lot of co-authors, and this is part of a special issue of the Journal of Great Lakes Research that was focused on a particular conference, I think. So can you talk just a little bit about what it's like to create a paper like this and work with so many people?
I should say it was a wonderful experience, and are mainly driven by Jean-Philippe and Orlane, the first two co-authors. And it was amazing. It was a pretty small first conference between IAGLR, it's our International Association of Great Lakes Research, and Large Lakes organization from Europe. It was the first conference. And was not so many people, around 100, and we were just sitting and asking questions. And at one point, it was a like one session, not so many people. And one point, someone say, okay, why we're not coming all together and we'll write one paper? So we have so many data and we're working in so many lakes, but we have this, in many cases, we have similar problem. And actually, Jean-Philippe and Hollande started this. They divided. First, we had a discussion over emails, what would be the topic, and then divided in main topics. And 2 or 3 people were writing one session on like one degradation topic or introduction, putting the literature. And actually, I was thinking it will be forever, but it was very, very effective. And it was a great, it was great leadership of Jean-Philippe and Hollande that they kind of put us all together and giving us deadline and say, okay, you have to finish this. And each of us, 2 or 3, I was with a team of 2 other people, and we were writing and discussing our small part, and then we were discussing the big picture and so on. And it was several iterations, but it was great.
Wonderful. The focusing power of a hard deadline, I think, is
exactly. So it's
But also the value. I mean, and this is another thing that we've heard a couple times through these podcasts: the value of getting the people together in the room to start to think about, okay, we're all working similarly in other places. How can we work together? And this is a really cool outcome.
This is amazing because you feel this energy, like you feel the energy and expertise, and you start working with people, and it's just great experience.
Yeah. That sounds great. Well, Maria, this is really interesting, but that's actually not why we invited you here on Teach Me About the Great Lakes. We invited you here on Teach Me About the Great Lakes to ask you 2 questions. And the first one is this. If you could choose to have a great donut for breakfast or a great sandwich for lunch, which one would you choose?
That's a hard one. So, but I should say I would go with a lunch. And maybe a couple of nice people to have this great sandwich.
Okay, good. So when I'm in Toronto, where do I go to get a great sandwich?
There is. I live in the beaches, which is a great area. And there are several good places, and one of my favorite is actually Bagel on Fire. So this is a nice bagels on fire, and they're doing great job with sandwiches.
Wonderful. Yeah. Well, I can't wait to go for a sandwich at Bagel on Fire. Great. And the second question is this. We'd like to leave our readers with our readers. We don't actually have any readers. We'd like to leave our listeners with one. Well, we do have Let me start this whole deal over. We'd like to leave our listeners with one piece of life advice. Something they can take home with them. It can be big or little, serious or silly, whatever. What's one piece of solid life advice that you have?
It's hard with a silly one. I have to think a lot. The silly one. The one which I'm thinking is just never give up. And I think that is the advice I follow. I think that is the best one.
That is really wonderful advice. Well, Maria Dittrich, if people want to find out more about you or your work, where can they go?
The best is my homepage, also my Twitter. So I'm posting there all our news and some my own opinion on what is going on. Those are 2 the best. And you're always welcome to come to Toronto and to visit University of Toronto, of course, and enjoy Great Lake Ontario.
Done and done. Well, we'll put links to both of those in the show notes. And Maria Dittrich, Associate Professor of Biogeochemistry in the University of Toronto, thank you for coming on and teaching us all about the Great Lakes.
You're very welcome. It was my great pleasure.
thanks so much to Maria for joining us and talking about that really interesting paper that is kind of terrifying in its own way. But I think it's really valuable whenever huge groups of scientists can get together and sort of, talk about their collective, I would call it lessons learned. They say it is a warning, and of course there's a warning involved, but it's like, this is what we know as a group of scientists who all work on related issues.
Right. And the whole thing about science is, the more you see a certain thing, the more certain you are that it's actually happening. And when you are considering ways to address it, the more times that those work, the more you should do that.
No, that's a really good point. When we're seeing these patterns, not just in Lake Michigan, or not just Lake Michigan, not just the Great Lakes, but across the nation and the globe, that's pretty meaningful. Yeah.
Yeah, it's really, really cool. So,
right. Well, what is one thing that you learned about the Great Lakes today, Carolyn?
So I thought it was really interesting that they, by bumping down the surface area size by, 500 kilometers squared to 100 kilometers squared, they managed to capture 90%, was it, of all the surface area of the inland lakes that are not necessarily all freshwater lakes, but that's pretty amazing.
Yeah, she said surface area and volume, which I guess is not inherently surprising, but it's still notable. I agree. That's it's amazing that so much of our now she said world's lakes, so I don't know how rivers. We should tune in for some future episode where I ask a lot about that. But still, so much of our lake water is contained in really, really kind of large lakes. That is interesting. And related to that thing, I think I mentioned it a couple times, but that sort of, to me, counterintuitive relationship between surface area and susceptibility to climate change specifically, I thought was pretty interesting. And that's what's sort of tricky about science and anything is it's not always obvious, right?
Right. Yeah. And that's why it's important to have people who are thinking about it and being objective and trying to figure out what the answer is. I will say that the one thing that I meant to ask that I didn't was she talked about the mud that was lovely. Yeah. And when I started out as a researcher in the Great Lakes, there's this thing called a ponar. It's like a big set of jaws. You can drop down to the bottom and you pull up the sediment. And whenever you're sampling, you sort of sieve it through depending on what you're looking for. Sometimes you want the fine sediment. Sometimes you want the invertebrates, which you can guess which one I was going for. But one time we pulled up this mud and the field crew that I was on, we were like, man, this looks fantastic. And one person said, we should just give ourselves a facial with it.
Oh, no.
So I grabbed a full handful and rubbed it all over my face. And, thinking back, I was young. That was my first field job. There's a chance that maybe I should not have rubbed that all over my face, but,
You should have at least done the biogeochemical sampling first and found out how safe.
Exactly. Should have run the samples before deciding to do that. Or perhaps autoclave them or something. But yeah, anyway.
Well, just autoclave your face afterwards. And that's like young scientist insults. No, autoclave your face. Anyway. Great. Well, where should people go if they want to find out more about Sea Grant, Carolyn, in case I don't remember the social media stuff?
Well, they can visit our website, iicgrant.org, or we are on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. And I believe all of those are ILINSEAGRANT.
ILIN Sea Grant for Illinois, Indiana Sea Grant. And you can find more of our podcast at teachmeaboutthegreatlakes.com or follow it on the Twitter feed, which I'm going to successfully tell you right now is twitter.com/teachgreatlakes. Well, thank you so much for joining us, everybody. We'll see you again on the first and Monday of every month, the third Monday of most months. And in the meantime, keep great in those lakes. Somewhere's the outro. There it is. Did I hear you singing that?
Yeah, I sang one of them.
Yeah, that was good. Almost as well, probably better than I did.